Um, First, I feel terrible for Senator Menendez. I haven't followed the trial very closely, but hard to believe he could have gotten a fair trial, considering the fact that the FBI was and prosecutors were producing all those pictures of gold bars and cash in pockets. I can't imagine a fair trial could result after that. I like Senator Menendez. He's been a very good senator, particularly on foreign policy. And I feel bad for him. And I know that Chuck Schumer has said he ought to resign from the Senate. I think he ought to wait until after the appeal to see whether or not his appeal will be affirmed. We know we've had governors and senators and congressmen who have been convicted. I just came back from Alaska, where two famous people from Alaska were convicted, and then their convictions were reversed on appeal. So appeals are a very important part of the process that people often neglect. Now, I'm an appellate lawyer, a criminal appellate lawyer, so I have a special interest in appeals, and I've won so many appeals of so many people who everybody have assumed were guilty. Some of them probably were. Many of them probably weren't. But the appellate process is as important as the trial process. The appellate process really determines the law. And that's why when people refer to Donald Trump as a convicted defendant, they're wrong. First of all, he hasn't been sentenced. So without a sentence, there is no judgment of conviction. There's a jury verdict. But there should be an appeal, and the appeal should reverse the conviction in that case. That case is simple because the judge allowed the jury to make findings based on proof by preponderance, not proof beyond a reasonable doubt, and gave them multiple choice as to which criminal conduct they find him guilty of. So that should be an easy case to reverse, and the judge has already postponed the sentencing until September. So until there is a sentence and until there is an appellate affirmance, if there is one, which I doubt there will be, Donald Trump should not be called a convicted defendant. And I think all the rest of the cases against him, I don't think any of them are going to be tried to verdict until after the election. So let's take that off the table. Let's vote for who is the better person to be the president of the United States, the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, for the next 4 years. And let's put these fake criminal cases behind us. My book, Get Trump, I make the cases. I'm thinking about putting out a new book based on what's happened since Get Trump, particularly the New York case, because it's just such a disgrace to our criminal justice system. Prosecutors often overreach. Obviously, the New York case is the most extreme example of overreaching I've seen in my 60 years of practicing criminal law. But I also think, and here a lot of you folks disagree with me, that the Alec Baldwin case was also an overreach by prosecutors. And of course, there was the suppression of evidence, which resulted in his acquittal with prejudice. I don't know whether or not that will be reversed on appeal. There will be an appeal taken. But that's we shouldn't be concluding a person's guilt or innocence until after the appeal is validated. Ask Klaus von Bülow; he'll tell you. Ask my numerous other clients who were convicted at trial and then acquitted on appeal, reversed on appeal, including death penalty cases. So before we make any final decisions about Menendez, certainly before we make any final decisions about Donald Trump, let's wait to see how the appellate process plays out. But now I want to switch to something that's just been annoying me and worrying me since Saturday night, and that is the total, utter, complete, unjustified incompetence of the Secret Service. The Secret Service has multiple jobs. It's supposed to deal with counterfeiting of money. It shouldn't have multiple jobs. There should be one organization in the United States whose sole job is to protect the president, presidential candidates, vice presidents, former presidents, protectees, legitimate protectees. Fortunately, Bobby Kennedy has just been given Secret Service protection. I'm not sure I'd be so happy about that if it's under today's Secret Service. when you go back and ask yourself what this director of the Secret Service has said, she said she refuses to resign, but we now know what incredible incompetence there was. There's a report today in the New York Post that they didn't have a person on the roof because the roof was slanted. It wasn't slanted enough to prevent the shooter from taking careful aim and coming within an inch of destroying America. Because can you imagine what would have happened if the bullet had been an inch in a different direction and had managed to kill, God forbid, tragically, the current nominee now for president of the United States? There'd be blood on the streets. It'd be much worse than the John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and even Martin Luther King. And remember, Martin Luther King caused tremendous disturbances. This would have been worse because we're a much more divided country now, and there are so many people with guns. I just dread to think what would have happened if Donald Trump had been killed. And the reason he wasn't killed has nothing to do with the Secret Service. That's the reason he almost was killed. The reason he wasn't killed was because he moved his head slightly. Had he not moved his head, we'd be living in a different world today, not only in this country, but around the world. And the incompetence. I mean, nobody knows to this day now, it's been 3 days, nobody knows who was supposed to make sure that building, which was within easy rifle range and plain sight of a standing target, not like the John F. Kennedy assassination from the 5th floor, moving target. This was the easiest shot in the world. And the idea that this building was not appropriately cordoned off and occupied by Secret Service agents. Apparently there were some in the floor below, but no, you don't want a Secret Service agent to go on the slanted roof, God forbid. But, why weren't there drones? Why weren't there cameras? Why weren't the most obvious precautions taken? As I said before, this was the easiest assassination in history to have prevented, the easiest. Remember, our country has a morbid, horrible history of assassination. I wrote my first article about presidential assassinations, believe it or not, in 1967. 1967, most of you weren't born. I wrote about a man named Richard Lawrence who had tried to kill Andrew Jackson and had fired point blank 2 pistols at Jackson as he was leaving the Capitol, right in the view of members of the cabinet. And for some reason, neither pistol fired, and Jackson wasn't killed. And the man who shot him, Richard Lawrence, was prosecuted by a part-time songwriter. You might have heard of him. His name was Francis Scott Key. You can't make this stuff up. The man who shot at Andrew Jackson, the first presidential assassination attempt in history, was prosecuted by the guy who wrote the Star-Spangled Banner. He was the U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia and or the District of Maryland, I forget which. But in any event, he prosecuted the case, and ultimately the result was an insanity conviction, and Richard Lawrence spent the rest of his life in a mental hospital. But then after that, we had Abraham Lincoln. He was shot once before he was killed. Bullet went right through his stovepipe hat, just missed his head by inches. And the night he went to the Ford Theater, the Secret Service, the one guy who was assigned to protect him, stayed home. And so John Wilkes Booth he just opened the door, put a gun to Lincoln's head, and shot him. And then there was Garfield and McKinley, and then Teddy Roosevelt. There was an attempted assassination. Franklin Delano Roosevelt attempted assassination. We all know about Ronald Reagan. Ford. It was a preliminary move by Squeaky Fromm to assassinate him. We've had so many attempted assassinations. In one brief period of time, when I was a young lawyer, we had John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, all successful assassinations. Martin Luther King was not a protectee of the Secret Service, but both the Kennedys were, and the Secret Service failed them. You don't get to fail at this job as often as the Secret Service did. We have to have a complete rebooting, The Secret Service has to be built on the model of the CIA and the FBI, total law enforcement with professionals. And now we have the head of the Secret Service, a woman, commendably saying we need more women and more diversity in the Secret Service, but she sets a quota. She says her goal is 30% women in the Secret Service over the next, 4 or 5 years. Quotas means a lack of meritocracy. It means when you have two people competing for a job and one comes within the quota and the other doesn't, the one who comes within the quota gets it without regard to the comparative merits of the two. There should be women in the Secret Service, of course, but they should be as competent as men. And, to the extent you need large people to protect the president, to form a barrier around him, yeah, height and weight should be a relevant factor. If that means more men, yeah, so be it. On the other hand, the intelligence aspects of the Secret Service, and that's probably as important a job as any, the preventive intelligence, women are going to be just as qualified as men. Of course, many of the people from the Secret Service come from law enforcement backgrounds, FBI, CIA, military, and you're going to get a higher percentage of men. So to the extent that this 30% quota in some way reduces meritocracy, it's the wrong approach at the wrong time. The last thing we need is DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, in our protective services. We don't need it in the FBI. We don't need it in the CIA. We don't need it in the military. We don't need it among pilots, among surgeons, and among any professionals who have the job of saving lives. Diversity is important. My view is that if you have real diversity of intellectual, diversity of backgrounds, diversity of economic, all kind of diversity, you're going to get meritocracy, because people are generally equal. There's no racial, gender, sexual preference differences that are obvious. I remember I recently had some surgery, and I needed to really get the best possible person. I checked all over it. Everybody said there was a particular guy, and he had a very, very waspy name. And so I assumed when I went into the procedure that I'd get this 6'2" Brahmin. And I got a 5'6" African-American from Brooklyn with a Brooklyn accent. And I was thrilled because obviously he was the best guy and he was an African-American. That's what I wanted. I don't care what the race of the person is or the religion of the person is. I want the best person having surgery. When I was on an airplane a couple of years ago with my family, and we had the worst storm ever from Martha's Vineyard to New York, I think everybody on that airplane had one prayer in common. Please, let the pilot not be a DEI pilot. Let the pilot not be somebody selected on the basis of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Let that pilot be somebody who was selected on his ability to ride through storms and get us safely with our families landed and home. There's a place for diversity in Congress, the media. There are areas where it's really important to have a representation of people of all backgrounds. We can do that without compromising meritocracy. But if we do compromise meritocracy in terms of who is the anchor on CNN, I could care less. But if we start compromising meritocracy on the basis of who's performing the surgery, or who's flying the airplane, or who's protecting the president, no way. We have to have a little bit of common sense here. And I don't think we're having a lot of common sense. So, we have to start from scratch. First of all, we have to right now put the Secret Service into essentially bankruptcy. It is not qualified at this point to protect the current president of the United States, the current Republican candidate, the vice presidents, and other protectees. I don't trust it. I'm sure these protectees don't trust it. They all love the people around them, the people who are going to jump in front of them and protect them. But what do they know about the people who are making the intelligence decisions about how to allocate resources, making a decision? Well, we're not going to secure that building. That building's outside the perimeter, as if the perimeter is some God-given magical place. No, the perimeter is just arbitrarily selected. This was a house, a building that was within clear view and clear rifle range, and the Secret Service was in charge of securing that building. And they can't say, as they're now saying, well, we thought the local authorities would do that. Local authorities said, oh, we thought the Secret Service were doing it. And I think the Secret Service ultimately said, we think Batman was in charge. We think Batman. No, Batman says it wasn't Batman, it's Captain America. Come on, we can't have that kind of misallocation of responsibility. The Secret Service has to be in charge of everything. It has to make the decision who was securing that building. And if that building is not properly secured, it's on the Secret Service. Don't blame it on local authorities. And then we hear this other absurd claim, well, it's Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, they have open carry laws. No! Open carry laws don't protect, and the Second Amendment doesn't protect a 20-year-old carrying a gun onto a roof within plain view of the presidential candidate. No, there's no Second Amendment right to hold a gun in the presence of a protected candidate. And the Secret Service knows that. It conducts all these, searches and seizures. I've been to many events where the Secret Service is protected. I've met with lots of presidents and lots of presidential candidates, and we're always searched and we're always surveilled. Nobody talks about Second Amendment or First Amendment, even First Amendment rights. I'm entitled to say I think the President of the United States should be assassinated. I can't say that at an event where the President of the United States is speaking and I'm 100 yards away. Even the First Amendment, certainly the Second Amendment, have time, place, and manner restrictions.